Hi, this is Rodrigo from Wilches Studio, and this is the Creative Hustler Show. Today's guest is Simon Wilches Castro. He is an award-winning animator and also the creative director of Titmouse Studio. Welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
So, can you tell us a little bit about your history? How did you get started into art? What made you go into it?
Okay. So I think art for me has always been like, I guess it's the only thing I have ever done, or the only talent that I've managed to make a living out of. But it also starts with a passion. So I've been drawing since I was a kid. I was fortunate enough to have like a family that was very technologically oriented, and this was meaning I come from a very small town in Colombia. So this means that just having a personal computer at home when nobody else had one. So I started like using Paint, like the Microsoft Paint, which recently got killed and then revived. And then from there, it's just exploration, like playing with a video camera to make like tiny animations with toys, or following up with like drawing on the sides of notebooks till, like in the year 1990, I stumbled onto the software Flash. This was after I had graduated from my high school, which had zero art instruction. So, but I just, that's the only thing I wanted to do. I was a very bad student in anything that wasn't art. So I basically spent my time trying to learn Flash on my own before actually going to college, because I also didn't know what major or career was out there at the time that could teach me what I wanted, which was making films. So, and especially films in animation, that's what I wanted. So I basically stayed a year sabbatical, like on my own, just trying to learn Flash that I found on the internet. This was Flash 3. And I had no tablet, just my mouse, and I had no knowledge of layers, nothing. It was like a very ridiculous process. And then I got good enough that I could make like super short films, ridiculously bad films, but it's still like I could make things move. And then a year after, my parents were like, okay, you need to go like study something. Like you cannot stay here at home. So we found that your sister, who's living in Colombia, in Bogota, which is the capital, she has found this like school that teaches a thing called visual arts. And I go, okay, sure, I'll try it, but I don't think that's going to teach me what I want. So I basically took my portfolio, which was like one of those 3/4 discs for the time that don't exist anymore, and I go to take a admission test, and it was like an art school. So I was like watching like all these films from Eastern Europe, trying to analyze these films, and I had no idea. And then at the end, it's like, I just flunked this test. I'm not going to get accepted. And I did get an interview. I called for an interview. So then I go and I show them my my portfolio, which was my disc. And they all had Mac computers. I was doing this in a PC, and they couldn't even read it. Like that was like, oh my God, I'm such a failure. They are already past the discs, which is all I know. They have CDs. But then I showed them, they managed to find a computer, they saw it, and they were like, wow, did you make this? It's like, yeah. Like, what studio? It's like, no, nothing. It's my living room or my room. And then they were like, whoa, this is crazy. So accepted. And from then I started, the school actually didn't teach me animation, but it taught me a bunch about film, art. So this basically became what my career has been to the moment, which has been like doing basically somewhat like artistically driven animation, not not much of like content driven, like stories, but more like exploration of the visual aspects of animation, or like music, visual music, and a lot of conceptual work. So basically I studied that. Years later, I went to Cuba to take some more formal classes. Basically, I spent my whole college doing animation, like sculpture class. It's like, I'm going to do an animated sculpture, or like all these things that I just wanted to do animation. So I tried to like put it in as much as I could. it worked for me. And then I went to Cuba. I started a little bit in Cuba, which has a big animation tradition. And then I started doing an animation political web show in 2000s, because Colombia was a very politically driven country. So we started doing this with my friends. It got kind of popular. And I ended up getting a scholarship to do a master's in animation and digital arts at USC in Los Angeles, California, which is where I currently live. So it's been basically sort of like learning more formal education as I go through my life doing animation.
Awesome. Also, we do have like this experience doing political stuff. My partner does like small comics for a newspaper here, and it has gotten him in a couple of times a bit of problems because we do not choose any political party. Like for us, like they are all the same, and we just try to choose whatever makes more sense at the moment. But as you can imagine, like he makes one comic criticizing one party, and then there's the people saying that this guy just criticized this party, and then he criticized the other party, and now there are people like getting angry at him, and it's like a never-ending story. Did you went through something like that?
Yes, our project was called The Little Tyrant, which was it was basically the Little Tyrants, because it was a pair of twins, and one was from the extreme right and one was from the extreme left, and basically they would argue about all topics, but the moral always was like they're basically the same. Colombia was going through this moment in time where we had like a very far right president, but we were also neighboring Venezuela, which had Chavez, which was like the opposite. And Colombia based their entire like political like clout, this president, on like, oh, Chavez is going to come in the country and take everything from you guys. And Chavez was kind of like doing the same. So it became such a ridiculous thing that nobody was talking about at the moment. So it actually got us into trouble, but it got us into it brought us better, more good stuff than bad stuff. Because actually this is animation concerning. By doing animation, it was very non-threatening. Like we made sort of like South Park-ish kind of designs and stuff. So it was like little kids talking about politics. It was not like, like, oh, revolution, like hiding our faces, So actually animation was a great device to approach people to deliver these messages. The usual trouble, like some people don't like it, they insult you, some life threats, but on the internet, fortunately, we got a few lawsuits, so, but everything turned out fine.
Awesome. Also, can you just tell us a little bit about your experience and how did you got into Titmouse?
Yeah. So when I came to Los Angeles, I started working on my own films. That's a thing that I hadn't done before because I was so focused on doing this political content. And it was mostly cartoons. So, we're doing like homages or callbacks to like the classics, like Looney Tunes or South Park that we liked. But I hadn't like explored my own personal kind of like aesthetic as an animator for a while. So I came here, this was like a 3-year program at USC. So I basically focused on just working on developing style as an artist and developing like a discourse as an artist. And exploring different techniques on how to tell these ideas. And I made a film called Semáforo, which is in Spanish. In English is Stoplight. And it was addressing a political situation in Colombia about people begging for money under the stoplights and how people do it in Colombia, which was by doing beautiful acrobatic performances, but also like people from victims from war that had like amputations that were fleeing the war in the countryside to the cities. So they would just basically show you like their amputations or like their burnt faces. So the film was a visual allegory about how you go in your car and you're watching these people do like these beautiful juggling acts, and then all of a sudden you're just watching like deformed people. And that film was very successful in the festival circuits. It got a bunch of awards. It got a Student Academy Award, an Annie Award nomination. Well, anyway, it was very, very successful. So that film took me everywhere, and that was only my first year at school. So I started getting like all these offers and getting to talk to people. And then I made, this was year one, so I still had 2 more years at school. So I still had to finish. But at the end, I had like a name that I could like, people somewhat knew because I had gone to like a bunch of festivals around the world. And then the day after I graduate, or like a week after I graduate, I get an email from the producer at Titmouse. This sounds like a dream because most people just struggle. And I was like, that was my fear. But I think I did like all the struggling. I did it like since I started school. I didn't wait for the school to end to start looking. I started looking since I started. So a few projects for kids. At first, it was just like doing animation, like the most traditional animation for this weird TV show called Kirby Buckets. It wasn't as traditional as other shows. It was still like a little weird. It was live action animation mix. And this was directed by, animation direction was by Freddie Christie, who was my first director in animation. And it was still kind of weird, squashy, stretchy, surreal animation. And then time went by. This was like 2 years. And then time went by and they started, I made a film for an event they call 5 Second Day, which is a day in which all the employees at Titmouse can do one short film. 5 seconds is the least amount of duration. And everybody had told me, this was my first one, and everybody had told me like, oh, everybody does here like incredible action or like super raunchy films. Like they do like the most raunchy jokes. And I was like, man, how do I stand out amongst the people, you know? Like if everybody here's a great animator or they have like an incredible sense of humor, and I don't think I'm either. So I'm just gonna make like the most pretentious artistic film that I can make just to like mark a difference. And I have my sense of humor. It's just like dark political, you know. So I decided to make this film called The Vertical Chip, about a guy who's eating a Dorito, you know, like those triangular chips, and he's eating it and gets stuck in the roof of his mouth, and he starts choking, and he's about to die, and he remembers his life as he's dying, and he pleads to God to save him, and God refuses. But I had this narrated in French, and it was like very kind of like, it was like an idea of pretentiousness. It wasn't really pretentious. It was more stupid than pretentious. But I got a guy to narrate it in French, and I showed it in this festival, and the reaction was like crickets. Like nobody was like, what's this weird thing? But it was different enough and well made enough that the producers noticed. So they approached me. So I started to start directing this mini commercials for Adult Swim, which is the adult channel of Cartoon Network. And I did 3 of them, and those also start getting into festivals. They had like a very distinctive style and a weird narrative quality. So they started getting into festivals. The biggest one is Annecy and Ottawa, like the 2 of the biggest festivals in the world. So you know, I remained consistent as a worker, but then they said like, you know, it seems like you have something to say and you can do stuff well, so we're going to start giving you more opportunities, which is amazing because the studio not only provides the space to be weird, like those kind of things that I did, but also gives you like incredible people with incredible talent to help you improve. Because my work for myself is very strange, but it's still rough. But now that I work with other people, it's becoming like super polished and still keeps the spirit of what I want.
Nice. The first time that I got to know Titmouse, well, I think it was like many other people with this series called Metalocalypse, and I completely love it. And then I started to check out more this work that they do and their website and all that, and definitely caught my attention that they do a lot of animation, a lot of work that is not like you say, like a traditional kind of thing, but it definitely stands out from many other things that people have said. So how do you find this challenge of producing something that is unique, because this is like the topic in creativity, like trying to create something unique, something that is not the same as everybody else, but it's also hard to do something like that it actually works with a lot of people. So how do you approach this challenge?
Well, it's been very interesting because one of the first things that I like faced when I moved not to Titmouse but to the US in general was um, I don't know, like everybody's gonna know the same things that I know, and they're just gonna be better. You know, like that's the kind of like fear that most artists have. And I mean, I've met incredible animators that were half my age, right? Like animating stuff that I don't think I'll ever be able to animate in my life. And I was like, oh man, how do I stand out amongst all this talent? But then I realized that there is a factor that is very valuable in basically personal stories of artists. So, for example, before I came here, I lived in Cuba for a while. I come from a very particular part of Colombia, and nobody that I've met in the US can even imagine a thing like that be real. Like, it's very rural. Like, we have a bunch of like cultural influences, a bunch of unique things of the terrain, basically, that form you as a human. Um, and you carry all these stories with you. And then also, I'm a huge fan of animation history. So I basically know a bunch of animation from like 1910 to today. I'm like a super aficionado, and I try to see different stuff. So what I realized is I brought that in with me, and then you start. I don't. I don't. Or rarely I do want to say like, oh, I just want to be so different from anybody. I just want to do stuff that is entertaining to me, or that feels interesting. Um, and you know, one of the things of being in an industry is that the industry is kind of like normalizing a little bit. So you do get to see a bunch of stuff, but all of this stuff is following a certain trend. The thing that attracted me most about Titmouse is that it felt like while they were still doing stuff that felt very traditional, they still have a space for people like me. Um, and one of the benefits of this time that we live in is that there is a big demand for like stuff in general, you know, like in the phones, in all these networks, in all the new platforms for streaming. People just want to see stuff. Or they're opening like all these little like more specific channels for specific audiences. Um, and I feel like my luck has been just as I was always an animator because I couldn't do anything else, just being like this person that has like this very unique take on stuff, because I cannot do what the other people can do. If I could animate mecha warriors, I would, but I can't, so I have to just animate the weird blobby stuff that, you know, so um, the biggest, it's not a challenge because people want to be, people want to do interesting stuff. It's just sometimes like the vocabularies are limited. So it's not really, you don't have to do anything except like just show people what's out there, you know, and tell like, this is what we're going to do. And the wonderful thing about an environment like Titmouse is that you meet a bunch of people that can do everything. So you just show them like, oh, or push them a little bit in a direction. You're always doing this kind of animation. What if you try doing this? Or, you know, just a shift in perspective. So you end up having like the most amazing people just doing the weirdest stuff, and it usually comes out as the best and most innovative stuff.
Great. Also, how has been your experience in Adult Swim? So far, I've seen a lot of comments on the internet that Adult Swim is like one of the best things right now in the animation industry, because even though they do not have like this huge budget like Nickelodeon or Cartoon Network or whatever, but they are still very open to the creative inputs of the creators, and they do not try to change a lot of things, and they give a lot of freedom. So I wanted to ask you, how has been your experience with them?
Yeah, my experience with them has been, it's a young experience. Like I haven't worked with them for, I mean, it's been like two years at most, or 3 years. Um, the thing you say about budgets is, I think that I've learned is like, the more budget you have, the more control you have. So sometimes a lesser budget, it might be more difficult to coordinate, but it gives you more freedom because it's less, people feel like there's less chances to waste money, you know? So you do get like more freedom because there's less risk. So you have to bring in the risk. And the impetus to go like, if I do something great with this amount of money, then, you know, next time maybe they'll give me more. And that's sort of what's happened with me. I did direct this incredible project that's been like, for me, one of the most funnest times that I've had recently. It was doing an exquisite corpse for Toonami. Toonami is the anime kind of like brand of Adult Swim and Cartoon Network, which has been around for 20 years, and they wanted to do like this experimental animation with 27 different animators. You know what an exquisite corpse is? It's that experiment in which you start an animation and then you give the last frame to the next person, but the next person doesn't see what was animated before. They just have to start from one image and then you put it together. And we did that with 27 people. In animation, you cannot wait for the first person to animate to give it to the second because it'll take forever. So we just have people kind of like imagine one image and then just pass it around through 27 people. Because of my festival kind of like a career trajectory, I've been able to meet a lot of people from many parts in the world doing, in my opinion, very interesting work. So I was like, hey, I have 27 5-second spots, so you can go crazy. And I offered this to like 27 of the people that I really admire the most. So I was able to bring them in, and I mean, I'm always an artist, so I'm always gonna have like this feeling of like, oh my God, this is it. This is when I fail. This is when I destroy my career. Um, so I was like expecting this to be like, what are you doing? Like, we gave this to the wrong person, but this is all like internal turmoil that makes me work harder. The thing is, Adult Swim had no interference. They were like the coolest people to work with. They just gave us like an instruction. We want this to be centered in our mascot, who is a little robot. And from then it was like free flying. So yeah, we came up with this like weird, creepy travel through like a black hole. And yeah, you know, it's like it has everything. It's the first time that I've worked in CG as well. Like I worked with a CG studio, and then it has everything from like hand-drawn anime style, paint, like a tempera paint on paper, stop motion. It has everything. So it was amazing.
Great. Something that is kind of a tricky question that I like to ask is that what was something that you didn't completely expect that you found out to be true in your career and that is really important?
Well, okay. So one of the big shifts that I had in my mind when you're doing animation and when you're a kid, I guess, you have like these ideas of what's the perfect job in animation, right? Excuse me. And then like, oh, I want to work at this studio, or I want to work like this for this company. And then the more you're going to the industry, the more you realize, oh, it's a job. And sometimes the things that you think are going to be the most fun are actually not as fun because they're more corporate. And then, to my surprise, the things you expect the least to be the more fun end up being like the wildest things. Excuse me, I'm just getting rid of a cold that I had. I had knowledge of Titmouse, but I didn't have the knowledge of Titmouse that I have now, of course. So I wasn't expecting Titmouse to be what it is for me now. You know, there's like Nickelodeon, Cartoon Network, Disney, like all these things that you dream about, and then all of a sudden I'm in this space where like I've actually think that I have so much creative freedom, and I was like, oh my god, this is, sometimes it's like this is where I want to be. Like this idea that I had of like, oh, I just if I don't make it to Disney, then I'm nobody, and then you end up working in a place that is just so great. And I'm every day that I wake up, I'm happy to go to work because it doesn't feel like work. Um, because to me, the biggest ideal is to have creative freedom, and I feel like this is what this work gives me, right? If I wasn't doing this at this point in my life, then I probably would just be freelancing or just independent animation. There's another, and this is kind of like, it's not sad, but it's kind of like you always also feel that you're reaching these checkpoints, like in a video game, right? Like, okay, I moved from my hometown to Bogota, checkpoint. I moved from Bogota to the US, checkpoint. You know, I graduated from school, like, but there, in reality, like, there's no checkpoints. Like, it's always like you always have to keep going, and you always have to like. Sometimes it feels like you have to start again. You get better and you get more confident, but it's always work, right? Like you never stop working. You don't. You're not. It's not like Neo. Like you just put yourself like a thing in the back of your neck, and you go like, I know kung fu. It's always work, and you always need to keep learning stuff. And sometimes it's very disheartening because right now we can access the internet and see everything, and then you wake up one day and you click on a thing, and then you find that a guy that is like, 11 years old animates 10 times better than you do, and you're like, oh man. It's like, um, so like you just have to keep your mind in a space that is like sane. And I always feel like you should keep being inspired. So I try to do stuff like go to museums, look at art, not just focusing myself on animation, but kind of like and go out in nature as well.
Something else that is like the reflection of the previous question is that uh, what was something that you completely expected that became true and important?
Well, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I expected Los Angeles to be a great place to do animation, which it is. What else did I expect? I don't know. To me, it's been more. Well, I mean, there's also a thing going back to the previous question, which is I also thought for a while that everybody was going to have like this independent impetus, to like everyone wants to do their own stuff. That's not really that true, which because I don't know, when in Colombia it is like everybody wants to do their own stuff because there's no industry to work in. So everybody's on a third. Here I was like, oh man, I feel like nobody wants to do their own stuff or nobody wants to collaborate like in an independent sense. Um, Now there's a shift because like political stuff here has changed, so everybody feels now like they want to like say something about the world. So it's become really nice to kind of like find myself in an environment now finally that I feel like I felt when I was doing my own stuff in Colombia. So I'm trying to rebuild that, and I've always expected animation to be great. I don't know, like I have so much fun doing it. So other than that, I don't know what I expected that has become true. Um, I've been recently doing more on my own personal shorts, which is always fulfilling. I lost it for a little bit because I was trying to establish myself in the industry, but now I'm back to do it, and I've always loved doing that, like personal work.
Nice. Also, when people try to start their own careers, especially into animation and all that, do you think, what is the most common mistake that people do that they are not aware that they are doing it?
Yeah, I feel, and this happened to me, and I came here quite older than like most of my classmates, and it still happened to me. Um, I feel sometimes you feel like you should be doing um, a thing just because it's popular at the time. And it's like, oh man, if this show is now popular, then I should do this same show, or I should learn how to draw in their style. And then you find out that there's just so many jobs that can go to a specific kind of show, or just so many clones of the same show can go on the air, right? So if even one. So I mean, I'm just gonna name names because, like, when I came here, Adventure Time was like at the top, and everybody was kind of like drawing like that. Or later with Steven Universe, like all those shows that are super well made and popular. And I see like very young people, and that's all they do, right? And it's fine to have good influences, but I feel like it's like, especially when you're super young, like that's your time to be exploring stuff. So I feel like people let go of like their uniqueness in order to just get a job, And it's been my own experience that it doesn't work that way. And sometimes it might, but in my own personal career, like it's always been better to just stay true to my own stuff. And it's a risk, So you kind of like you bet, oh man, if I do this weird thing and it doesn't stick, then it's always good to know how to do other stuff, like classic stuff. Like I draw weird, but I also know how to draw normal if I need to, right? And I think that's what, when I started at Titmouse, I didn't start being like, oh, this is the guy who does the weird stuff. I still started doing the stuff that everybody else could do. But I started like adding some of my elements into that just so I could like keep learning for myself. And you always learn. Like that's the thing. No matter what you do, whatever they make you do, you're always learning. You're learning to be faster and more effective in your way of thinking. Because when you're in a job, it's about doing stuff in time. And then you're like, but I want to do it like crazily good. It's like, okay, so find a way to do both. So I feel like that's a thing that I regret many times. I meet very interesting people, and I see their art, and it's not that interesting. And it's always because there's this connection between like your persona and the things you can like consume as a. So I always suggest like people should just go out, see more stuff. When I started being interested in animation, there was no YouTube, which is crazy to imagine a world without YouTube. But so you have to, if I wanted to watch like Czechoslovakian animation, I would have to find a contact. That was like getting like a weird drug. It's like, oh man, I want some of the good Czechoslovakian stuff. And then you get like a VHS, and it's kind of like poor quality, but you still get to watch like weird like Spankmeyer and like all these incredible authors. Today you just like need to go online and then just type whatever, right? And it's like if you want to watch like South African animation from the 60s, just type that and something will come out, I assure you. So it's most people don't do it, and it becomes more dangerous that not having YouTube, it's not having imagination to use it, right? So I feel like that's a thing that I witness in a bunch of young people. I used to teach class here when I was at USC, and I was like, but what are you guys doing? Like, you could be watching all the world as you grow up, and then you're just limited to like the things that you have at your reach. And I feel that's a mistake.
Definitely. I have felt that many of the things that we have been able to do, like people go like insane, like, how did you do this? And it's like, I search at Google,
Yep.
and 63,000 results came out. Like, that simple. And people don't get it. Like, even for example, I have a friend who had a passport from Spain, and she was trying to get the US visa. And I was like, why are you trying to get the US visa? Like passport from Spain are allowed to go into the US without a visa. And she didn't knew. It's like, you haven't even looked what your passport allows. And it was like a big hit for her that she wasn't able to search for these things on her own. Is like, if you want to go travel, you need to start using this thing in
Right.
better ways.
Absolutely. And I don't know. I feel like I have so much fun though, because I do know a lot about history of animation. So sometimes I'm talking with people about projects, and I go like, "Oh, you should be looking at um, like Raoul Servais animation," as if they knew, and they're like, who's that?" And then you show them like this weird Belgian guy that invented a technique in the 70s, and they're like, "Whoa!" Like so amazed that this thing existed. So I mean, it is somewhat a criticism, but it's not like a bad one, because there's also a nice thing of being able to share these things with people that didn't know them, right? Um, but it's always like, and this is also a thing that I think about constantly, which is where, like, how do I make new ideas, or how do I create like all these new things, which are usually not new in the sense of like that they haven't happened before. It's more like, how do you put things together? I'm usually going back to like all the things that you see today that you think are so crazy and edgy. They probably did them already in like the half of the past century in Eastern Europe. Like that's usually how it is. So yeah, that would be my advice. Like, just try to be more creative in the usage of your resources, right? Because you might find stuff that, and I do it. I mean, I don't do it as often, and I'm at fault as well. But sometimes I just sit around and I just go like, try to imagine what kids in Russia watched during, like the Soviet Union, and I type it on Google, and then like the weirdest cartoons come out. I was like, whoa, this is great.
Definitely. Also, something that is like a very common topic that comes up a lot is that I see that the people who are like better artists are the ones who have traveled a little bit more and have been able to expose themselves to different cultures, to different cities, different countries, and so on. And then they have been able to put all this experience into their pieces of art. And that's why they become great. And on the other hand, something that is like very common thread as well in the creative community, at least in my experience, is that you have a lot of artists who are just locked up in the rooms trying to draw whatever they found in DeviantArt or in internet instead of going out and trying to catch up things from the world. Has this when you started traveling, did you feel this impact as well in your art?
Yeah. And well, again, going back to that was one of the most interesting questions. I think it's like what things that you didn't expect and didn't happen. Well, one of the things that happened to me here is that I mean, I love living in Los Angeles and I love working in the industry. But one of the things that happens is that you kind of become too comfortable with like your daily life, right? So it's like, oh, I go to work and I work with my animation and I go back home, and then you start getting like at some point like, oh, I need something to say, and then you look back and it's like, well, I haven't done anything except working on animation. So it becomes the only things I have to say about the world are about my job in animation, which is not that interesting, to be honest. Like, I just come here and sit and draw crazy stuff, but that's not anything to tell. Um, and I do feel that that is one risk that one has when you, as an artist, like if your expectation is to use your art to tell stuff, that's one of the things that basically becomes at risk when you get too comfortable. So you always have to like, you don't have to put yourself at risk, like physical risk, but you should try to like, put yourself in uncomfortable situations. Like try to go to things that you don't usually go to. Try to do things that if you don't like running, try to go running. If you hate yoga, try to do yoga once. Like, just so those emotions become something that you can put, like if you feel embarrassed, then just later you can make a film that feels true about embarrassment, you know? So that's those things. And it's the same with like, if you want to see what the world is out there, like not just like your comfortable life, then there's always examples outside, you know? Um, the film that I made for my graduation was about the homeless people in Los Angeles, because one of the biggest shocks that I had was I came from a country with a big problem of like homeless people, mostly for drugs and like years of colonialism. Like I don't know, I mean, you must understand from like it's a very Latin American problem. And I moved to Los Angeles, you know, it's like this like Hollywood, and then all of a sudden you see incredible like heartbreaking images of homeless people here, and I just couldn't get over it. And this was just inspired by getting off school, in which I was all day secluded in my cubicle working, but I had to go home and I didn't have a car, so I had to like walk back from school, from my school to the train, from the train station to my house, late in the night. And I would just see like these images, and those were like so shocking to me that I had to make a film about it, because there's like the fear that I sensed of like just walking in the middle of the night, knowing that probably nothing was going to happen to me, but you know, like that like fear of walking, the lights kind of like shimmering, the fog. I was like, my God, this is so specific. And then I tried to tie like a social message with it, because it still made me kind of like ashamed of, as a human, to be witnessing this kind of thing. Like I am a person who is not from this country, yet I'm going to my house, walking by these people that are probably from this country but don't have a home, right? So that's how I started making that film. And it didn't require me to go to like the Himalayas, you know, like it was just like on my walk back to my house. So I feel like if you pay enough attention, you might find like a very complex um, experiences that you can tell as an artist.
Definitely. I remember this short film from Patrick Osborne, which had like a dog eating a lot of food. And pretty much that started because he was like, okay, I'm going to take like a little break. And then he started traveling a little bit. But in the middle, he started like a diet. So he had to document everything that he was eating and pretty much taking a picture of every plate that he had through the day. And that was kind of like the inspiration to make that short film. And
Oh yeah,
yeah, it hit me like he didn't have to do that too much. He just had to do something different, and that was like the whole idea for a whole film.
yeah, and I mean this is important that you mentioned this, because not everything has to be dark. Like I personally do dark stuff in my work, because that's kind of like reflects where I come from a little bit. But yeah, you can also be happy. We were actually I was taking a walk around the neighborhood here, thinking about this film that I had seen in my school. This woman fighting a chipmunk, and I was like, oh, so like critical about this film. It's like, oh man, like why do people make these stupid films? Like that film is so basic. I bet you it's like a guy who just loves like the Looney Tunes and couldn't think of something else. And then I kid you not, I saw this old woman arguing with a chipmunk on the street. And then there was this old lady just yelling at a chipmunk. And I was like, you know, I bet, like, I guess all these films come from a reality. It's just I don't pay enough attention. But that was like a funny moment, because it felt like a real life cartoon. So yeah, not everybody has to do dark stuff, but it's just a personal choice. But yeah, you can find good or bad inspiration from anywhere. Just it's about paying attention to something more than your phone, right?
Definitely, and also it comes as well. I think just what you just said, that a lot comes up from whatever you are putting attention and specifically, because there are a lot of things that are happening in our life, we are just not paying attention to them just good enough. They become like, let's say for example, a stain in the wall. Like once you have it long enough, it becomes invisible, but it's still there. And and just the point of view, for example, we and our team has like a kind of dark humor as well. So even if something is dark, we find what's funny about that. And that's how our brains works. Like pretty much nothing is serious. Like everything can be found like a. I know that sometimes we don't go to the most political correct things when it comes to our humor, and we don't do that things on public, but we still have it. But that's just our experience, and I found out like really quickly, especially when I started working with all these. We're doing this studio, we're doing these projects, the interviews and all that. And on one part, he was like, "Oh, like you are doing your dream, you're living your dream, you're living of what you love." And however, us doing this was a result of, yeah, but if we don't do this, if we don't have success doing this, like the life that expects us is like really shitty. Again, like Latin America problems. And pretty much that was the reason, because uh the crisis came up, like we got fired, like even my partner, I remember we talked with him like years ago, and he had no intention whatsoever of ever doing a business. He just wanted to be an employee, but he got fired, and then like nobody was giving jobs, and there was no other option. And that was like, that has been our course of choice up so far. Like we get to a point where we either do something or we face some really bad things. So it's like, oh yeah, like I really don't like to live in the streets, so let's do this. And we face it with humor. And for many other people, being in that kind of situation will be like, oh, this is overwhelming, I feel bad. And it's like, no, oh, just
Well,
do
I mean,
something else.
sound, I hope people take it the right way, but like hunger is a good inspiration, and like it's not good that people are hungry, but the fear of it is good inspiration for artists at least, because yeah, it's like you're facing this idea of like, if I don't make this work, then what else am I gonna do? I don't think I could do anything else. So I'd probably be facing like a terrible, terrible life. Um, so and then you become comfortable, and that's when the hunger ends, and you're like, oh, but then you need to shift it into like a different kind of hunger, right? Like um, now is like some sort of like intellectual, like creative hunger. Like what can I do that is also, it's not just for my job, it's also satisfying for myself. And then that's when you start like, I need to read more books because I need to get more ideas, because at the end of the day, what do I have to tell about my day? Nothing. I just worked all day. So and it's cyclical. You cannot always be in the same kind of like mind state, but sometimes you can like get fed up of being just too comfortable, and you just need to like start finding inspirations and stuff. Um, so yeah, that's I totally get what you guys are saying, and I admire entrepreneurship like that, because I used to have it and I lost it a little bit when I came here. But like now we live in a time where like with like the startup kind of like culture, it feels like everybody's doing their own project now. So it kind of like feel like I don't want to be the only one not doing it. And also Titmouse, the story of Titmouse is very inspiring to me as well, because it became of that spirit. Um, like it was a t-shirt company that Chris started, and then he was just so good at doing animation that people just wanted to give him more work about in it. And now it's an incredible studio, like has a place in New York, one in Vancouver. A bunch of people work here and have like the most incredible projects. So like it is good to work for a company like that, but it is also good to take the idea of how they started. Like if you want to be the person you admire, just realize that they had a dream at once and say like, I just want to start a company. So it's good.
Also, something that I wanted to ask you, because maybe you must be a little bit familiar with this concept of burnout, because I imagine that you have like to produce a lot of work. How do you deal with burnout, or how do you do to avoid being burned out?
Well, I I don't know. I feel like I'm lucky because all the work that I do is just so creatively stimulating that I've rarely felt a burnout. I mean, in animation, you always burn out a little bit because it's just such a demanding thing. So once you're like in the end, well, I'm actually going to give you an example of for that film Semáforo, where that was very good to me. When I was doing that film, I just started by just watching like all these super dark films, um, watching like trying to get like into this mind space to make this film. And then I also secluded myself in my room that I was living in at the moment in my apartment. This room that I was renting in an apartment was surrounded by mirrors. And I would just get up in the morning, animate all day, and go to sleep. My beard was growing. One day I remember I had like a big bag of M&Ms, and I look at myself in one of the mirrors of the room, and it was like this kind of like tired face with big beard, just with a bag of M&Ms, and I was like, what is this life? Like, what is this? This is the life of an adult? Like, I don't think this is the life of an adult. And I had a crisis because also it's like I'm making this film, nobody cares about this film, only I care about this film. It was a deep crisis, but it was more existential than anything else. And fortunately, I had to go to school to deliver another final. And then I saw people, and I was like, oh my God, it's like this. I love you guys. Like, like it was like this illuminating moment because I was just going crazy doing one thing. Um, then I made that other film about the homeless people. And actually, that film was so involved, like it actually got me a little bit depressed. So I've been learning that it's usually good, no matter how much work you have. First of all, you have to try to keep a big picture. Like what I'm doing now might not feel like the best or the most funnest thing, but just think of what's going to come out at the end. And also try to think what's going to come next. Because we have this saying in Spanish, I'm going to try to translate it, that it says like there's no pain that lasts 100 years, but there's also no body that can take it. So it's usually things are they're temporary, right? So yeah, you might have a horrible week of work, but it's just going to be over next week. You know, what I do try to do is exercise. Like try to be out in nature, like walk or run or do stuff that keeps my mind fresh of anything, because I overthink. Like animators and artists, we tend to overthink. So I try to do something that demands so much of myself that I forget my own self and I can only think of how difficult what I'm doing is. So that's one. Again, I also try to stay fresh by just looking at other stuff like music or concerts or whatever. Because in my mind, I have this aspiration of like trying to be producing this art that inspires me, right? So if I'm like at the bottom, I just go see these like people that I admire a lot, and then think like, oh man, if I work hard enough, then I'm gonna be this person one day. So it's kind of like trying to keep yourself motivated and also trying to keep yourself sane, because that's my biggest thing. Like I can go crazy too easily. And there's a thing that I've been trying to do lately because I read it's very helpful, which is sleeping, which I couldn't do it before. So try to get like at least 6 or 7 hours of sleep a night, and then that'll keep your mind sane. Because I put it in the way of computers. If you exhaust your RAM, you're not going to be able to process things. And I feel like when you don't sleep, then something comes at you. You don't have the emotions to kind of like, or the energy to deal with it, and then you're just like super emotional the rest of the day. Like, you feel like the world is going to end.
Definitely. Also, in your position, I imagine that you have encountered this, but I've been interviewing a lot of people, and this thread is very common as well. That many people, especially in animation, since we have to work as a team, uh, they sh- they have this problem that sometimes they find someone that is really talented and end up being a little bit crazy or maybe irresponsible, things like that. So people end up choosing people who are have decent talent, but they can work well in a team, rather than someone who has an amazing talent that can't work well in a team. Have you faced this in your career? And if so, how did you deal with it?
Yeah, I mean, I've never had until recently the opportunity to like pick so many people myself, but I do know that the most memorable people are the people that are the nicest. Nobody wants to work with like a like an annoying genius, um, because at the end there's so much you can do in animation. You're not going to change the world, and so you might as well do something that is good to you and everybody else you're working with. Sometimes it happens that you have to put up with complicated personalities, but it's not um, that usual to me. I personally have never faced that in my time here at doing animation in Los Angeles or at Titmouse. We all meet obnoxious people and we all don't want to work with them. That's kind of like the rule, no matter how talented they are. Um, but I mean, I've been now exposed enough to know that, yeah, the people that you usually see getting like like called back to projects are the people that not only are good, because everybody has to be good in a way, but it's more the people that also have like an easygoing personality that deliver on time. That's an important one. And in my personal taste, it's also the people that if you ask them for something, they will give you what you asked them for, and then we'll also try to bring a little bit more. Sometimes you have to say like, oh, that's not what I was looking for, but you appreciate the intent of somebody trying something, like in the way that of the project, like not something completely out there, but that they read you well enough or they understand the project well enough um, to bring something that's useful to it.
Awesome. Uh, this is a very hard question that I like to ask people, and I think uh, you will find that it makes a little bit more sense coming from Latin America. And it goes like this. Imagine that you wake up tomorrow and in a different dimension, pretty much nobody knows about you. But you have your computer, you have $500 in your pocket, and you have all your experience and your skills. What do you do to get to this position that you are right now in your professional career as soon as possible?
Well, that's not a different dimension. That was me like 3 years ago. uh,
Yeah,
the
I imagine so.
I mean, honestly, it's well, I don't know. It is going back to what I said at the beginning. You have to just do what you're good at, right? Like, and just do it hard, do it till the end, because then no, that's the only thing you have, and that's probably the only thing that might help you stand out. Um, you have to also work hard. I think it's in this documentary or something related to Schwarzenegger. Somebody like he said some quote that says, "When you're sleeping, somebody else is working." So I usually feel, even though now I'm trying to sleep as a thing, but I try to keep in mind that when I'm wasting time, there's somebody else working on the things that I also do. So it's try to like stay focused and doing the most that you can with the time, that even if that is not specifically animation or specifically work, doing something that might be useful for you in the later. Um, and then the other thing is, so there's that the other one, and then I don't know. I feel like there's also, trying to be smart about your surroundings. Oh, and this is an important one, is also learn how to self-promote. Like that's a thing that I've realized. And when you were asking me like what mistakes that people make when they're trying to, I feel like sometimes good people don't know how to like show themselves to the world, and a lot of bad people do. So um, people need to. I think I had that film that I made in my first year, which was good, but I also worked a lot in trying to put it out in festivals, and I think that's takes time, and it takes a lot of, you have to deal with a lot of like insecurities, because what if you get rejected? And sometimes you do get rejected, so you have to like deal with that idea. But sometimes it sticks, and then that gives you enough to get your name out there. So it's, when I first moved here, I kept thinking like, what is the cost of me moving here? Not just like financial, but like all the other stuff, like all the people I left behind, like my family is back in Colombia. I don't know anybody here. I have to like basically start from kind of like zero. So what am I going to do with the energy that I have to make this worthwhile? So, that basically required to do. I was very shy before, like well, kind of, but it's like I need to put my film out there, so people see it. And because if not, then why am I making it for? So I learned that very early, and now I'm like the self-promotion, like whatever I do now, it's out there. But also like learn to read the landscape, because sometimes you can pursue a thing that is maybe not the thing at the moment, but you may need to learn a few more skills, in order to like sustain yourself for a while, or make whatever you do a little bit more fit in the current environment. So if I didn't know Flash and Photoshop and all these other things, then probably I wouldn't be working at a studio, even as good as I could be as a filmmaker. So sort of like knowing those things.
Nice. Is there any advice that you would like to give people who are starting out in their careers that we haven't talked into this interview?
Um, no, I mean, I think it's difficult to give advice, because what works for one person might not work for. And I think your website does a good job of like interviewing a bunch of different array of people, because that's the other thing. I have a very specific interest in what I like to do in animation, which might not be the interest of the other. I told you a little bit, like I love to do dark stuff, but not everybody has to do it. So I feel like, yeah, just try to stay fresh, I guess, like, and try to be interesting. That's the thing in general, like, and I don't mean interesting to me, but interesting to like yourself. And being interesting is just like going out and looking at a bunch of stuff, and getting to know a bunch of people. So
If people want to find you on the internet, what would be the best places to do so?
well, my website is www.simonwilches.com, which is going into like renovation at the moment, but I'm on everything. Like if you type my name, Simon Wilches Castro, uh, you can find my Instagram, my Twitter, my Facebook, and I usually say yes to everybody. Like that's the thing that I learned when I was in Colombia, and that's actually a difference. When I was in Colombia, one of my main things was getting access to people. Um, so I used to contact a lot of animators from in websites and stuff, and try to get them, talk to them about their craft, and not even jobs, because I wasn't considering even like getting a job in the United States, but more like, how do you do the things you do? How do you become so good? Like basically what you're doing right now, to in these interviews. Um, I used to do it personally myself. So, and when people responded to me, I was like, that is a great person in the world. Um, it's not all in all the cases, right? Like you don't. Sometimes you find people that aren't as responsive, but when I would find somebody, I would just feel so grateful because that was my access to, like animation, my future, my career. So that's why I keep a very open like policy with like who I accept in my website, because I have like this big debt with like the universe, I guess. But yeah, that's it. At Simon Wilches C from Castro. I use that in most of my accounts. And I'll send those things to you on written form. Yeah.
Thanks a lot for giving us your time here and your knowledge. I truly appreciate that you made the time, because I know that you're busy. And yeah, I definitely agree with you that, especially when we were starting out these interviews, I was so amazed that people who were like really big, like we didn't even have any episode, and Fred Cyber say yes, then Stephen Silver, and then pretty much I just keep trying bigger people just because why not? And obviously there were a lot of people who say no, but there were people who say yes, and I'm like really grateful to all of the people who have said yes to these interviews, because thanks to them we've been able to learn a lot of things that we didn't knew about the industry. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, and that's one other thing, that going back to your question about expectations. I usually, from the distance, from my little corner of the world in Colombia, just looking at people's work, I usually idealized everybody. Every animator that I met was like a 7 feet tall giant with like 8 hands that could do great stuff, with so much fear to like even approach these deities, like wow. And then you actually meet people, and everybody's like everybody else in animation, at least. Everybody's just so normal and so nice that and that's one of the things that you get when you go to festivals. You meet people and you're like, oh, are you this god that I idealized from your work? And you're actually like a regular human. That is nice. So I feel like in most cases people are just very open and nice about what they do. So yeah, people should just reach out, and because nobody else is going to be looking for you, so you might as well look for the other people. So that's it.
Yeah, I think it's very important to just keep trying to reach out, because at the end, like 10 or 100 people say no, but just one that says yes can change everything. So that's at least what I learned. Like many people have said no to these interviews, many people have said no to working with us, but the people who have said yes like had made a huge difference, and that was maybe less than 1% of the people that we contacted.
This is a very old saying, but when you used to take cameras with like a film, in film, it said like you can take 36 photos, only a good one justifies the roll of film. So I feel like that's kind of like the thing. You get like 35 bad ones, but one good one is the. I also feel that with students when I used to teach. Like I can have 35 terrible ones, but if one is a good one at the end, then I feel like accomplished. So thank you so much for having us, and then yeah, I hope you enjoyed the time and the talk.
Definitely did. So this has been the last episode of the Creative Hustler Show. If you have liked it, please click like in the button below, and also share this interview with your friends. Until next time.